Well, I'm just tickled to be back at Mount Morris. You can't hardly understand how tickled I am to be here. For a whole slew of reasons. So I will tell you this, the sun was bright, it was 72 to 75, the sand was warm, and after, as I forget who mentioned this, after about 2 hours you've seen enough and ready to come home. So, not for me. I'd rather been playing in a snowdrift below zero. Well, that's what I say. What I'd like to do in Sunday School Hour for the next several weeks is kind of take a look at in a series of really intriguing people from the Old Testament. Rather than look at a book per se, study, what I'd like to do is look at several people who I think are really interesting, some of whom you will know, and other people you might not be familiar with. Although I suspect most of you have sharp enough biblical IQ, you'll recognize most of them. But I think they're worth looking at because they encourage us, they bless us in a way in which we say, well, back in the Old Testament, they didn't have much grace going for them, and they didn't have a lot of things, pluses in their life, but look at their character. And that's really what this is, kind of an extended character study to see what sort of people were in the Old Testament. We often think of, so many times, especially in the church, we have some very outstanding men in the Old Testament. You know, we've got Moses, we've got Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. We've got Joshua and Caleb. We've got Jeremiah. I'm not going to look at any of those guys because you should know those guys pretty well. But there are some really interesting women in the Old Testament that just knocked my socks off. They put, in many cases, men to shame. And in fact, if it weren't for some of these incredible women, the whole course of the Old Testament might have turned out somewhat differently. And so, with that in mind, what I'd like to do is have us take a look at a young woman who is described in the Old Testament scriptures, and the only place in the Old Testament where a woman is thus described as both intelligent and beautiful. Now, that might not ring a bell with those of you who are King James Version readers, but you might ring a bell if I say a woman who has good understanding, which is the phrase I think is used in King James. Anybody have an idea who that might be? Take a guess? No, but you're in the right part of the alphabet. Abigail. Now, Abigail is just one of those most fascinating, strong women who was caught in a patriarchal environment. She's in an arranged marriage, which really stinks. And so I want to take a look at her a little bit because I can't wait to meet her. I think she's just a fascinating woman. She's a sturdy, strong, intelligent, beautiful woman who has so much common sense. And her choices, literally, this kind of minor character in the Old Testament she is, plays a major role in the deliverance of David in his progress to the kingship of the nation of Israel. She prevents him single-handedly from shedding innocent blood. And do you remember, it wasn't long ago when we were looking in Sunday school, that David could not build the temple? Remember, he was prevented from doing that by God, and do you remember the reason why? Because he shed so much blood. Not just innocent blood, but blood. But Abigail comes in the time and place where she prevents David from shedding innocent blood. Lots of things to look at here. We're in chapter 25 of 1 Samuel. You may be familiar with that, but the context of this chapter 25 is really interesting. In the interest of time, I'll just say it briefly. Chapter 25, King Saul is chasing David and tries to kill him. Chapter 26, King Saul is chasing David and trying to kill him. So within that context, if you were David with 600 guys trying to escape the clutches of King Saul, who's trying to capture you and kill you, constantly being harassed, having to live off the land, you might be a little testy too. So when we get to chapter 25, we are introduced to, in verse 2, a certain man in Maon who had property there at Carmel, was very wealthy. He had 1,000 goats and 3,000 sheep. Now, I don't think having that many goats is any big deal, but back in those days, I guess it was. His name was Nabal, and his wife's name was Abigail. She was an intelligent and a beautiful woman, but her husband, a Calebite, was surly and mean in his dealings. Not a nice man. Sometimes you will run into women who somehow have made the wrong choices early on in life and get hooked up with a guy who's a bum, a mean-spirited guy, a guy who just doesn't seem to have much joy in his life. Hopefully, your children have never married into that sort of thing. But in this particular case, Abigail didn't have a choice who she married. It was an arranged marriage, as well, all marriages back then. And so she was stuck with this guy. Now, I find it interesting that we find these contrasts. Abigail, intelligent, beautiful. Nabal, who was just surly and mean. I don't think it made for a good relationship. It's interesting also to notice that they don't have any children, as we'll find out. They have no children. That may not have been Nabal's choice, but my hunch is Abigail might have said, "You might be my husband, but you ain't touching me," which would have been a pretty bold thing to say. But I have a hunch she did, because she's strong, and she's intelligent, and she has common sense. By the way, Abigail, one thing I love about Abigail is it's such a lovely name. If you know people by the name of Abigail, I don't know if you do. I know one Abigail, and she is like this Abigail. The name Abigail means my father's joy. I think that's cool. But having said that, I wonder if her father, who found joy in his daughter Abigail, found joy that she was in such a horrid marriage relationship. It must have been sort of sad. But nevertheless, she is thriving. Now let's notice what goes on here. In verse 4, when David was in the desert, he heard that Nabal was shearing sheep, so he sent 10 young men and said to them, "Go up to Nabal at Carmel and greet him of my name. Say to him, long life to you, good health to you and your household, good health to all that's yours. Now I hear at sheep shearing time, when your shepherds were with us, we did not mistreat them, and the whole time they were at Carmel, nothing of theirs was missing. Ask your own servants, and they will tell you. Therefore, be favorable toward my young men, since we come at a festive time. Please give your servants and your son David whatever you can find for them." David is looking provisions for his men. They need some sustenance. And he comes, he gives us a brief bit of history that Nabal's field hands, his farm help, out around Carmel were protected by David and his men. David and his men took no advantage of them while they're out in the field. They were good guys. They respected Nabal's property, and they didn't take anything from him without asking. And now this is a time when they come to Nabal and say, "Nabal, God bless you, but remember, We had opportunities to take from you whatever we wanted to, whenever we wanted to, however we wanted to, how much we wanted to, but we didn't because we respected you and your property. Very complimentary. But now we come to you with a request. Would you be willing, please, to provide us with some food supplies? And verse 10. Nabal answered David's servants. Now tells you who Nabal is. Who is this David? Who is this son of Jesse? Many servants are breaking away from their masters these days. Why should I take my bread and water and the meat I have slaughtered for my shears and give it to men coming from who knows where? Well, that's pretty insulting. This was not just a simple, no, I don't think we can. This is, I'm going to rub your nose in it, David. I'm going to offend you right to the quick. Well, I love what David's guys do. They got the message loud and clear. Okay, I guess he's not giving us anything. We better go back and report to the boss. Now, I don't know if when you were a kid, you ever had to go tell your dad something that wasn't very good, like he had done something, and you had to go confess to him, and you kind of regretted having failed in the mission, and you go back to your dad or whatever, your teacher or your boss, and you say, I failed. I didn't complete the task. So I think these guys go back to David knowing that David's stressed already with bad news. We're chapter 25 of 1 Samuel there, Pat. Oh. When they arrived in verse 12, they reported every word David said to his men. Put your swords on. We're going down there. We're going to teach these buggers a lesson. We ain't trifling around no more with these people. So they put on their swords, and David put on his, and about 400 men went up with David while 200 stayed with the supplies. Oh boy, these guys wrote their own death sentence. David's going to take his 400, dressed to the hilt in their armor and their swords and their weaponry, and they're going to go down there and they're going to kill every man, every woman, every child, and Nabal, and they're going to take everything. It's all or nothing for David. He's got this fury built up. He's got this stress just waiting to explode. Nabal is that piston, that chunk of dynamite, that catalyst that says, all right, I've had enough. I've had enough. Do you ever say that to your kids? You can say it to them 1,000 times. I've had enough. But finally you do get it to the point where you've had enough. I don't know if you ever did that with your kids. But with my kids, every time, especially with my daughter, I've had enough, Amy. I've had enough. Clean up your room. No, Amy, you need to do your homework. We've had enough now. We've had it, and she always knew it wasn't quite enough. She could always go a little enough more. It was probably poor parenting. Same with Tim. Tim, you can't go hunting. You got to do your homework. Tim, you can't go plant trees. You got to do your homework. Tim, you have to go to school. We don't care if it's deer season or fishing season. You have to go to school. You can't skip school. You've had enough of your whining about it. And eventually, we get to the point where we've had enough. For David, and then we blow up and yell and scream and holler and give him a whooping. Well, not really a whooping. I gave my son a whooping once. And I regret to this day, because he didn't really need it, but I was just stressed and he hit me in the right place. Sometimes people that are built like me get hit in the right place with stress and tension and emotion, and you just kind of take it out on the person next to you. And never whooped on my daughter, but boy did I want to. So they come to David, and David's ballistic. We're going there, and And I'm justified. I'm justified. One of the servants in verse 14 told Nabal's wife, David sent messengers. He hurled insults at them, yet these men were very good to us. They did not mistreat us. Nothing was missing. Night and day they were a wall around us when we were herding the sheep. Verse 17, now think it over and see what you can do, because disaster is hanging over our master and his whole household. He is such a wicked man that no one can talk to him. Fortunately, the report comes to Abigail. And now we meet one of the most remarkable women in the Old Testament, because she must operate on the basis of her good common sense, her industry. Her character shines through, that we know she is a godly woman, like Proverbs 31. If you know that chapter, most of you I'm sure do. What are the characteristics of a godly woman? She is that. In verse 18, Abigail lost no time. She knows time is of the essence. Because David's already on his way with 400 riders, mounted, armored, and ready to kill. They are ready to take what they want by violence and to shed innocent blood, to kill all of Nabal's household for Nabal's fault and Nabal's sin would have shed innocent blood. Now maybe Abigail fears for herself, but let's look at what she does here in the next couple of verses. Abigail lost no time. She took 200 loaves of bread, 2 skins of wine, 5 fresh sheep, 5 seahs of roasted grain, 100 cakes of raisins, and 200 cakes of pressed figs, and loaded them on donkeys. Where did all that stuff just come from? She didn't go down to Wegmans or Aldi's. Where did all that stuff come from? What does that tell you about her, ladies? This is a woman who was never idle, was she? She had it put away. She had already baked this stuff for her extended household. It was already in the pantry shelves. This stuff is like fill up the sacks with all the stuff you could possibly get into it. Clean the shelves, because if David comes and kills us all, it won't make any difference what we've got on the shelves. What this tells me is this woman didn't just say, I've got a couple of cakes, raisin cakes, and a couple of loaves of bread. I guess I'll just put my feet up now and rest. And, maybe I'll call up Beulah next door and we'll just gossip about what's going on in the world. And we'll just hang out. And maybe we'll go down the mall and go shopping for a while. But no, she's been busy. Tells you something about her character. She's industrious. She doesn't let moss grow under her feet. This is a pretty amazing woman. Now remember, all the while we're talking about her, she is in this horrible relationship. Where does that commitment to being a good house manager come from? Think about that. If you were married to this guy, you might say, if I was married to the guy, I'd like, I'm going to do the bare minimum, just enough so he leaves me alone. And if the servants want more to eat, they can bake it, but I'm not going to manage it. This is a remarkable woman. She has put her shoulder to the work in the midst of terrible circumstances, a terrible day. Yeah, Marla?
He was probably what he was because of her. A good woman.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. It's sort of a study in contrast. Here you have as bad as you can get, and here you have as good as you can get. That's pretty neat. And somehow God preserves this woman and enhances her character. Because we see it's not just industrious character. It's a godly character. It's a godly character, and it comes out when she meets him. Anyway, in verse 19, she says, "Go ahead, I'll follow you guys." But she didn't tell her husband Nabal. Good wisdom, huh? Yeah, yeah. It's what you don't tell your husband that can hurt you, right? Yeah, boy, oh boy, oh boy. This is great. I love it. I love that little phrase. But she didn't tell her husband. So that's like Babs on the beach. On the beach, for those of you who've been there in Mexico or any resort, but particularly in Mexico, you have these itinerant beach merchants. You know what I'm talking about, Pat? You've been places like that. And you have these native people, these Mexicans, who are dressed in their white clothes so they don't get scorched. And they're selling stuff. And it's a constant parade. It's a never-ending parade of stuff that comes by. It's everything from jewelry to scarves to perfumes to tattoos. I didn't get one. And I was tempted though. I tried to get Babs to get one, but she didn't interested. Anyway.
Massages with aloe plants.
The what?
Massages with raw aloe.
Massages, you name it. Anything you want, you can get on the beach, I guess. My wife's eye was captured by jewelry, as it is always wont to be. So I happened to come down the stairway to this beach, and I see this Mexican with a suitcase opened up on the beach in front of my wife, and I think, she's not going to tell me. And she didn't, until we were on our way home. What time is it, honey? It's beautiful. It's a beautiful silver glaze. You could probably buy the same thing in Walmart for half the price. Yes, you could too, Pat. Anyway, I was thinking, is she going to tell me, or is she's doing this subtle one? You know? I got a pretty good tan, didn't I, honey, with this big bracelet sticking out. Finally, it occurs to me, she's trying to ease me into the notion that she bought this bracelet, but she doesn't want to come right out and tell me, because she's not quite sure that I'll be upset. But I hate to say this, but sometimes you women are terribly deceiving of your husbands.
I hate to say this, but sometimes you have to. How do you like that?
See, I love coming here, Lord. You see what I'm saying?
I had to say that.
Well, you're probably right. There's probably so much I don't know about my wife's life that she has kept from me that I'd be shocked. But then again, knowing Babs, I probably wouldn't be shocked at all. Anyway, I love this. This is made for the movies. Isn't this made for the movies? This is the most amazing made for the movie. If I was going to direct a movie, this is the movie I want to direct. Because it is the most wonderful. It's like here you have David and his 400 riders, and they're all breathing hard, and the horses are sweating, and they're sweating, they're red in the face. They've got their hands on their sword, they're ready to kill whoever's in their path, and they come down one side, and here comes, on the other side, here comes Abigail, and with all her servants, with all this food, and all things ready to go, and da-da-da-da, they collide at the bottom of the ravine, and all of a sudden David looks up and he goes, that's a pretty good looking woman. Maybe I better slow down. I doubt he responded exactly that way. But what we know about David and Abigail subsequent, he was immediately taken over. So a couple of things happen here. Here you have a really good man, David, who's bent on revenge, which is never a good thing. He's going to take revenge on Nabal, the whole clan. and kill them all. But Abigail, being of good understanding, intelligent, knows that a gentle answer turns away wrath. Now, there's a rule of thumb of how we ought to live relationally. My son has often asked me, and I don't know why he asked me, because apparently in this generation, couples fight. And so they tell me about, well, yeah, we had a fight. I said, I don't know what that means, he and his wife. What does that mean? What, you mean you had a disagreement? No, we had a fight. I said, well, you mean you threw punches? Pots and pans? What does that mean? No, we had a fight. I don't know what that... You know, every healthy relationship has a good fight now and then. I said, your mother and I have never, in almost 50 years, ever had a fight. I don't even know what that means. A fight. Well, you know, when you have a healthy, strong-spirited disagreement, I said, we've never had one of those. I don't know what you're talking about. Maybe it's because my wife is way far more intelligent than I am. I say they're complimentary. But Proverbs 15 again tells us a gentle answer turns away wrath. What a wonderful woman to have that understanding, eh? Isn't that something? She knows that she must have a particular attitude in order to save the day, not only for her household, but for David, who will be king. She fell at his feet, bowed down before him with her face to the ground. Now, she doesn't have any power. Do you understand? She has no ability to defend herself, or her family, or her household. But she has the one thing that is stronger than all the armor that David has brought with him. Stronger than all the armor known to man. She has a gentle answer. She knows that if she tries to argue with David, it will end poorly. But instead, she's intelligent enough. This is God-given wisdom, isn't it? This is God-given wisdom. When you want to sink your teeth into a discussion or an argument to prove that you're right and someone else is wrong, you'll probably end up losing. But in this case, look at what she says. So her action is subservient. It is gentle. She fell at his feet and said, "My Lord, let the blame be on me alone." On me? This is really fascinating. He knows she's not to blame. She knows she's not to blame. But she accepts the responsibility of her husband's sin and ingratitude. This is amazing. This is an amazing woman. Now, I don't know. My wife has had to do this for me, and I am embarrassed to say this is true, but in my youth I was not a very happy man and filled with anger. And there were times when my wife indeed had to apologize for me because I had offended someone. In some cases, many ones. My joking around came out sounding like anger, and actually it was, until God broke the bondage that freed me from that. And my wife had to apologize to some of our friends for the things I said that were hurtful, or the things I did that was hurtful. I mean, it wasn't terrible, horrible, awful things, but they were not nice things. So when I see this woman do this, I know this woman has got wisdom beyond the normal. Pay no attention to what wicked Nabal is. He's just like his name, he's a fool. But as for me, your servant, I did not see the man my master magnificent. So now in the next several verses, this next paragraph, through verse 31, she's explaining to him why his anger should abate. Verse 31. He says, "My master will not have over on his conscience the staggering burden of needless bloodshed or of having avenged himself." She's interested in King David's reign. She knows of. She's not a simple housewife who is not up on current affairs. She knows about David. She is highly intelligent. She's well informed. She's industrious. She is the way every woman ought to be. She hasn't stuck her head in the sand. She hasn't adopted a victim mentality of, I'm in this terrible relationship, poor me, woe is me, I'll never have joy in my life. She drives ahead that God has allowed me to be in this position for some reason. And now she knows why she's married to Nabal. To protect David from shedding innocent blood and having on his conscience the fact that he did shed innocent blood. She protects him from that. She protects David as the future king. So when we begin to think about this, my last question, if Abigail had not been successful, what might have been the consequences as it plays out in the Old Testament? Do you think that if David had come down and massacred all of Nabal's household, taken all his goods and possessions, that David would have ascended to the throne? Or that there might have been consequences? Think about it for a moment. If his reputation got around, that in his anger, he shed innocent blood. In other words, he not only killed Nabal, but he killed the whole household and took all his possessions. How do you think that would endear him to the citizens of Israel? Would they trust him? Would they follow him? Would they crown him king? I don't know. Reluctantly, wouldn't you? I might be a little reluctant. Can I trust David not to be overcome with anger, emotion, being mad? Maybe he'll get mad at me one of these days. Maybe I said something that wasn't quite complimentary enough to King David. Maybe he'll come after me. She is preserving the character of David. David needed a lot of people like Abigail in his life. And frankly, so do we. I think Abigail is one of the most exciting women, the most exciting characters of the whole Old Testament. And of course, the outcome of this story is toward the end. After Nabal dies, which happens in about 10 days, I love it. Nabal, you might have escaped David, but you're not going to get away from God. Let me tell you what, try as you might. And so, in verse, it must be around 39b, then David sent word to Abigail, asking her to become his wife. Now there's a man who knows what he wants. There's a man who recognized superior quality, and he wants that woman to be a part of his life. Now I wish, and we could all wish, that David had taken more of Abigail into his life. Unfortunately, she became only one of his several wives. And we don't hear about Abigail much after this. She had one child. But David was already married, as we find out at the end. I hope he treasured her like no other. But I'm not sure he did, because there are plenty of times in the rest of his life where he needed her wisdom and common sense. And it doesn't appear as if she had opportunity to influence him in that way, which is a shame. What a wonderful woman. One thing I love about this church is that it is filled with people like women like Abigail. Even those of you who give me a hard time, there are certain qualities that just keep bubbling to the surface constantly. Of wisdom, of prudence, of discernment, of insight. And oftentimes, even in the New Testament times, women have a tendency to be somewhat marginalized by men in terms of their leadership abilities, simply because they're women. But let me tell you what, if Abigail were here, we'd tap into her real fast, wouldn't we? We would. The point is, I think there's a whole bunch of Abigails in here. And you're Abigails because God has created you that way. He's cultivated you that way. And you have wisdom to share. Anyway, that's my own personal bent. That's maybe one of the reasons why I find fondness in our hearts, Babs, in our hearts for this building, this church, and you people, because you exude that kind of wisdom. You are Abigails to us in so many different ways. Not only Abigails, you're Esther. We're going to look at several other women, but what I'm going to do is, because I don't want guys to think, oh, this is just about women, I want to look at, on alternate weeks, some really cool, manly men that you might not know about. So, anyway, let's pray then we'll go. I've lost my watch again. It's probably under my wife's wrist. Father, thank you so much for your kindness toward us. Thank you for your love toward us. Thank you for your grace toward us. Thank you that you love us in ways in which we daily begin to experience new dimensions of. We thank you that your love for us is steady, but our understanding of that love is constantly growing. Thank you for the wisdom of women. Father, I pray that these women will be as strong always in godly ways as Abigail, that they would have perception and insight and understanding that come from God Himself, and that they share that and point it out, their insights, to others, that we might all benefit. For who knows that maybe one of these women is here, maybe they all are here for this collective purpose, to keep us on the right track, to point out to us the things that are obvious that we as men sometimes miss because we're task-oriented, we're goal-oriented. Father, we thank you that the women in our lives give us a perspective that we need. And if we didn't need a woman's perspective and their companionship, you wouldn't have made me. So we thank you, Father, for your provision. And we thank you for your word. And we pray that you might minister to us as the day goes on in Christ's precious name.